Hello, I am Dr. Mirela Cernăianu, and I welcome you to the Wellness Optimizing Warrior MD podcast, the WOW MD podcast. I am not your typical wellness coach, and this is not a typical wellness podcast. Here, I'll discuss educational facts about health, hormones, intimacy, anti-aging, and beauty trends, all very hot topics, to empower you to make great choices when it comes to your health and to your body. I want you to go, wow, I did not know that. Or, wow, this is going to make a great difference for me. Our healthcare system is broken and it needs a revolution. You and I can start one today. I am willing to share my knowledge with the world if you're willing to listen. Let's get started. Hello, listener, and thank you so much for coming back for another episode. Today's episode is about, are we eating a dirty diet? Is our food and our way of life making us sick? I want to talk a little bit about our diet in this episode, not because I want to preach about eating a healthy diet or a clean diet, but I am here to open your eyes about the possibility of a lot of us eating contaminated food and a somewhat dirty diet, to discuss what might a clean diet look like. And a lot of you might be thinking, well, I know I'm eating a clean diet. So that might not be the case. And even if you think you're eating a clean diet, please listen, because you might find out some interesting information. So the reason why I wanted to talk about a clean diet is because a lot of the food products that we consume that are easily available are usually containing a lot of things we have no idea what they do. And probably a lot of us, including me, think, okay, well, this product looks pretty clean. Should be good to eat. It's healthy. However, the point of the podcast, and I'm going to be honest and upfront, is that if we eat something that we have not personally put together and prepared from fresh, clean food, then it's likely not going to be as clean as we might think. Even then, there is a risk that the fresh food that we are using to prepare our meal has possibly been contaminated with stuff that we have no idea. Pesticides, chemicals, genetically modified product has been treated with antibiotics, etc. Now, what I like to do in today's episode, I'm going to expand and tackle some things we get exposed to daily that are not necessarily food, but they're very toxic for the body. And like I said, is our way of life making us sick? It's part of the title, because we do get exposed to a lot of things because of our way of life and all the modern amenities we take advantage of daily. So what would a clean diet look like? What is it? Well, the answer is very, very, very simple. If you had listened to the previous podcast episodes, I'm talking about the chemicals that we can get exposed to, then you already have the answer. The clean diet is not a healthy diet. It's a clean diet where we do not have any exposure to chemicals. Now, the top entry point for chemicals in our bodies is likely to be our food and beverages that we drink. The top contamination is likely ingestion. We swallow, we drink, we eat, we chew all kinds of food and beverages contaminated with chemicals or made with water that has been contaminated with chemicals. So ideally, a clean diet, in my mind and in your mind, should be one where there's minimal to zero exposure to such chemicals. So again, a clean diet is not a diet where you might eat the perfect combination of macros, or a diet where your food is healthy, or a diet where your food is home cooked always, or a diet where your food is always fresh, cooked by you, or maybe a diet where you cook fresh and you eat fresh every day, but you never put your food in a container, you never eat packaged food. A clean diet is a diet that's all these attributes, takes also into account possible external contaminants first and foremost. So I think most of us, when we think about our diet, we want it to be as healthy as possible, but we also want it to be easy and convenient. And here lies our weakness. We are always busy. We never have enough time to plan, to prepare, to shop, to cook. and to eat the ideal kind of food for our body type, the ideal quantity for our body type, and the ideal macros and calories for the amount of activity that we do daily. So to be honest, I believe that's a problem that a lot of my patients have. In our haste to be very, very efficient, but to satisfy our taste buds and cravings, frequently we step away from the path of ideal clean food and develop habits, become comfortable and accustomed with what works for us. So to some extent, we all do exactly this. We become comfortable and accustomed with what works, what we like. We don't eat a huge variety of foods. We eat certain things, and that's not always very good. Now, if you suffer from fatigue, digestive issues, anxiety, depression, or both, foggy brain, rashes, eczema, and last but not least, if you have weight issues, you're overweight or under your ideal goal weight, then please keep listening and perhaps find the motivation to change something that might make a difference for you. So first of all, why do we need to worry about a clean diet? And again, I'm not using the word organic, fresh, wholesome. I'm using the word clean for a very specific reason. And I mentioned this before in the previous podcast episode. We live in an extremely contaminated world. And we do not realize that this serious contamination has reached over and impacted our food chain and the foods that we eat. So let's talk a little bit more about this subject so I can make it clear what I mean about the fact that we probably eat a dirty diet. So I did mention chemical pollutants we're exposed to daily, day in, day out, probably every activity that we do from the moment that we wake up in the morning until we go to bed at night. But let me say a little bit more on this subject because, as I said before, many chemicals are ubiquitous. They are everywhere in our day-to-day environment, and they're present in various products we use regularly. So let me give you some examples. Let's start with some things that you might not know or consider as toxic. Well, let's start with our toothpaste. It contains ingredients like fluoride, abrasives, surfactants, preservatives, and of course, flavoring agents. Now, you might be asking, well, fluoride is good for our teeth, right? Well, it's added to prevent tooth decay, but a minimum amount of that will be ingested. And if you do it daily, twice a day, more, it will eventually do something. And fluoride and bromide compete with iodine. So that might actually affect your thyroid if you didn't know. We do have abrasives that help remove plaque and surface stain and some artificial colors, sweeteners, antimicrobial agents, which destroy our oral microbiome. So there's all kinds of things in the toothpaste. How about detergents? Well, our detergents contain surfactants, enzymes, fragrances, and preservatives. Of course, we need the surfactants because they help lift the dirt and the stains. There's some enzymes in there to break down protein-based stains. We always need the fragrance because everybody likes a pleasant scent. But all of these contain synthetic chemicals that might trigger allergies or sensitivities. And all of these chemicals will need to be detoxified once they come in contact with the body. What about the soap? We wash our hands a lot. We shower with the soap. Well, all the soaps, the body washes, and the shampoos will contain surfactants, moisturizing agents, preservatives, and fragrances. We need the surfactants to create the lather to cleanse the skin. If you get a soap that's not making a lot of lather, you're not going to like it. We do need the moisturizing agents to help hydrate and soften the skin. And everybody likes fragrances. However, all these fragrances in the personal care products are synthetic and will contain phthalates, which are linked to hormone disruption. Please review my episode on estrogen receptor disruption on how these estrogen receptors are extremely sensitive to different chemicals, and all these chemicals need is an aromatic ring to be able to latch onto the receptor. And the phthalates in fragrances do have that. What about our perfumes? Well, we need to wear body deodorant. We need to use perfumes, especially women. Perfumes and colognes contain a mix of synthetic and natural ingredients, which includes alcohol, fragrances, again, more phthalates, and fixatives. There's all kinds of chemicals, and some of which might be irritating or causing allergies. Again, a lot of these compounds have raised concerns about health risks because they do have a capacity to affect our bodies. Consider our clothes. Our clothes can be treated with chemicals during our manufacturing process for purpose like wrinkle resistance, stain repellency, and maintaining the color. So synthetic fabrics like polyester, nylon, acrylic may contain chemicals like formaldehyde or flame retardants or perfluorinated compounds, which will get activated in the process of washing and drying. And of course, the dyes that are used in textiles can contain harmful substances like heavy metals or toxic chemicals that will be activated and ready to get on your skin as soon as you take it out of the dryer. So again, the bottom line is that the cumulative exposure to all of these chemicals from multiple sources in our daily lives will contribute to our overall body burden, which will impact our health over time. So it's always important to consider that body burden of toxins, which I talked about in the previous podcast episode, and always opt for clean and healthy and organic every time we can and limit exposure to all of these chemicals. So obviously, coming back to our food choices, I'm not going to take each food apart and explain why some of them are bad, some of them are good. You can just Google the most contaminated foods. I'll mention the GMO foods, but similarly, our food choices will play a very significant role in determining the exposure to toxins and chemicals because the way the food is produced, farmed, processed, and packaged can and will introduce various harmful substances into our diet. And every time you opt for a product that is presented to you, prepared, processed in a box, a bag, a can, or packaged in a container, you might unknowingly increase your intake of chemicals. So let's talk about how different aspects of our day-to-day food choices will and can impact our toxic and chemical exposure. Well, processed foods. Remember I talked about convenience. I am personally guilty and I consume stuff that it's easy for me. So sometimes I pick up cooked chicken pieces from Costco, which I love. They taste real good. And the bitching sauce. I love to dip the little cooked chicken into the bitching sauce. It's an excellent lunch snack, by the way, if you've never had it. But these are both processed foods. And they will contain additives like preservatives, artificial flavors, there's colors, there's sweeteners. And all of these additives can introduce synthetic chemicals into our bodies, potentially contributing to our toxic overload over time. So ideally, you should consider breaking the cycle and eating those foods as little as possible and maybe replace them with minimally processed foods or whole foods, which can help reduce exposure to these additives. Promoting a cleaner, natural diet and obviously avoiding accumulating and contributing to our toxic burden. So maybe an alternative would be to have a sliced half an apple or organic carrots that I can dip into some hummus instead. Again, use your imagination. But let's talk about something else that's very common. Daily packaging. So all the packaging materials that the food comes in, like plastic containers, our cans lined with BPA, the food wrappers can and will leach chemicals into the food when they come in contact with it. Everybody knows about BPA. If you haven't heard about BPA, it's on a lot of labels, BPA free, this free, that free, because BPA, it's not good for us. On top of that, I mentioned phthalates a lot. BPA and phthalates are common chemicals found in food packaging that can disrupt our hormonal balance and have adverse health effects. I spoke about this in the last episode. So again, try to consider reducing your toxic burden by opting for fresh produce or something that's packaged in glass, in stainless steel, or other non-toxic materials. What about pesticides and herbicides? Now, how often do you question where your food that you buy at the market comes from? You don't. You just go to the market and buy it. But hopefully, you know that conventionally grown fruits and vegetables may contain some pesticide residue from agricultural practices. There's pesticides like organophosphates or glyphosate, which is found in herbicides like Roundup, and many others, and have been linked to health concerns. Now, let me tell you something that you might not know. Pesticides have been introduced after 1940s, after World War II. And what is very interesting is that cancer rates, cancer incidence, has been rising 1% to 2% every year since 1940s for younger people. So the correlation is very easy to make. The way we eat and the way we farm has been affecting our health. And I honestly do not see or hear many people talk about it. If you ask Google, why is cancer so common nowadays, you find out some very fascinating information that should be common knowledge. The top offenders listed are our lifestyle changes, pollution, and processed food as causes that have contributed to the increase in cancer, and of course, other diseases like inflammation, which could and will ultimately lead to cancer, which is everybody's fear. Now, a very interesting fact is that an article in The Guardian published 8 months ago states that the number of under 50-year-old diagnosed with cancer worldwide has risen by nearly 80% in the past 3 decades. And this is according to the largest study of its kind. So global cases of early onset cancer increased from 1.8 million in 1990 to 3.2 million in 2019, while cancer deaths of adults in their 40s, 30s, or younger grew by almost 30%. So there's a staggering more than 1 million under 50-year-olds dying of cancer every year. And that's what the same research reveals. It is estimated that for those born after 1960, the risk of cancer is 1 in 2. So that's a 50% chance we can get cancer before we die if we are born after 1960. Obviously, there's lots to say about this, and I might in the future, but let's stick with the subject of our eating habits and diet. So let's come back to our diet. Most experts agree that a poor diet, alcohol, and inactivity with obesity are very important factors. And these are the main causes for this increase in cancer risk and cancer rates. So what can we do? Well, the answer is simple. We can choose organic, non-GMO produce whenever available, whenever possible, and obviously try to wash our fruits and vegetables thoroughly, which will hopefully reduce our exposure to these pesticide residues and their damaging effects on our bodies. Let me keep going and tackle GMO foods, which means genetically modified organisms. First of all, why do we even have GMO foods? Because genetically modified crops are engineered to withstand herbicides and pesticides. And according to the FDA, there are 3 main reasons why they exist. Number 1, these GMO crops offer resistance to damaging insects. They develop tolerance of certain herbicides used to control weeds. So the herbicide kills the weed, but not the crop. And number 3, the GMO crops become resistant to certain plant viruses. So stronger plants, more resistant to the toxic herbicides. So according to the FDA, farmers can use less spray pesticides when they plant GMO crops, which will save them money and will reduce the amount of pesticides sprayed on crops. When farmers supposedly use herbicide-tolerant crops, it reduces the need to till the soil to control the weed. No-till planting helps to improve soil health, reduces soil erosion, will lower fuel and labor use and costs, and reduce the amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So as a conclusion, introducing GMO crops theoretically makes farming easy, more productive, and farmers can grow more produce easily. So this is all about generating cheaper food, which technically could help prevent famine, which affects so many parts of our world. Now, what's the bad? Why are GMOs so bad for us? Well, since genetically engineered crops have been introduced, instead of us getting healthier and have less famine in the world, we still have a lot of famine in the world, and we're getting sicker. We are becoming more tired, more overweight and obese, and have significantly increasing rates of infertility and all sorts of cancers. Apparently, glyphosate, an herbicide sold by Monsanto, to which genetically engineered crops are resistant, has been implicated in disrupting the ability our body has to detoxify the xenoestrogens, or also known as endocrine receptor disruptors, which is what I talked about in the last episode. Now, I can say a lot more about this, but there's a ton of information online. And if you need more proof that glyphosate or the xenoestrogens are messing with your body's weight management systems, your hormones or your organs, please go to the show notes down at the bottom. There's a link. And please feel free to review this article published in 2020 entitled Endocrine Disruption and Obesity, a current review on environmental obesogens. It's very detailed, it's very interesting. So let me end this about our diet with food additives. The food additives are added to our foods, and they have different names: artificial flavor, color, preservatives. So these are added to probably extend the shelf life, to make it more appealing, to make it better looking, to change color. But all of these have synthetic chemicals that may have very negative health implications. Some of these additives have been associated with allergies, with hyperactivity in children, with digestive disorders like diarrhea and colicky pains, with nervous disorders like hyperactivity, insomnia, irritability, respiratory problems like asthma, rhinitis, sinusitis, many skin problems like hives, itching, rashes, and swelling. So what are the most common food additives? Well, what about trans fats? Let's start there. This is a very popular nutrition buzzword for the past 15 years or so. These trans fats are created when food manufacturing companies add hydrogen to the oil during the manufacturing process, which can change the texture and extend the shelf life. So they're not good for us. They're very bad for us. So please avoid labels that state that the product has hydrogenated oil. I just went and shopped at the Nut House in Somis, and I was very tempted to get some pecan clusters with chocolate. Unfortunately, on the label, it clearly said they got hydrogenated oil, so I passed. Sodium nitrate is found in many processed meats. It's found in canned tuna, in sausages, and a lot of the deli meats. So try to avoid it if possible. Monosodium glutamate, MSG. It's very frequently encountered in many foods. It has been reported to generate numerous reactions like headache, flushing, sweating, facial pressure or tightness in the face, numbness, tingling or burning in the face, in our neck and other areas. It's been associated with rapid heart rate, heart palpitations, chest pain, nausea, and weakness. Again, we find it in Chinese food specifically or other types of Asian food. I know I'm personally sensitive to it. And a few times in my life, we have actually dined in a restaurant and I felt sick the next day. So the next time I go there, I do not eat the same thing and I put that on my X list not to order again. Or I'm very careful and perhaps never go to that restaurant again. What about artificial food coloring? Well, if you see a color and it says red 42 with a number next to it, it's a chemical. It does not exist in nature. And technically, you don't need to eat a food that has it added. Because if the food does not look good to you without the coloring, then maybe you shouldn't eat it. What about high fructose corn syrup? It's very popular with food companies simply because it is cheaper than cane sugar. But it is suspected that consuming products that contain it increases your risk of diabetes. So please avoid it. What about aspartame? Numerous studies have shown that this chemical can increase blood glucose levels, even though it's supposed to protect you and avoid you eating sugar. And it has also been associated with anxiety. And what about BHA and BHT? Those are preservatives that are commonly found in cereals, in our chewing gum, in potato chips, and vegetable oils that will keep the product from going rancid, from changing color or changing flavor. So again, try to seek out foods with minimal additives or choose organic natural products that can reduce your exposure to all of these harmful chemicals. Now, let me end this podcast episode with some very interesting information, which I found out doing my research, and I decided it's very important that I like to share it with my listeners. All the chemicals that I talked about in this podcast episode, in the previous podcast episode, all the pollutants, all the pesticides might actually leave our body rather quickly because the body is equipped with ways to handle them. For example, BPA is processed and eliminated daily, and a lot of the products that I talked about in this last podcast episode, and most of these chemicals that I mentioned, are not likely to stick around unless you keep putting them in your body to the point where your body is overwhelmed. And you just add the same chemical and pollutant day in, day out. So again, if you want more information about how your body is equipped to eliminate these chemicals, I talked about that in the last podcast episode last week. So please go back and listen. However, what I'd like to talk about here, there's an entirely different class of chemicals I haven't even tackled. The PFAs, polyfluorinated substances. These are chemical substances that have the ability to repel water, repel oil and grease. And these chemicals are added to a variety of products. Your hand lotion, your dental floss, non-stick pans, and some outdoor gear and industrial fabrics. Now, according to the Federal Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, high levels of PFAs may increase the risk of testicular and kidney cancer. It may lead to high cholesterol, heart disease. It can cause lower birth weights in infants whose mothers have contaminated blood. They may also decrease how effective vaccines are in children. Actually, there might not be a tissue or an organ system where effects of these chemicals haven't been reported. So a very, very interesting question would be, what is it about these PFAs, these polyfluorinated substances, that give them this remarkable ability to reach inside our body and take place there? Well, once absorbed, they don't leave. Once they get inside our body, they stick around. And this is partly because of the molecular structure of these compounds. They have a chemical bond that's very strong and super stable, so much so that these PFA chemicals have earned the nickname of forever chemicals. So they're just virtually indestructible. It's good for your pots and pans, but that is a big problem for us. In nature, it takes super high temperatures to break down the carbon-fluorine bonds in the PFAs. The problem for us is that the human body won't break down this bond either, because it is impossible for us to generate the temperature required to break down this chemical bond. So to have something that can stay coated and be resistant to temperature, that's very valuable. But when it comes to the body, to your own human body, or to the environment, these chemicals' ability to stick around can be horrible. And really, we haven't even started to scratch the surface or comprehend how these chemicals can affect us. Again, substances like caffeine, Tylenol, BPA, which is a chemical in plastics, they do leave the body in a matter of hours. Lead leaves the body in a couple of months. But for the most prevalent PFA chemicals, it can take years to even exit the body. Sometimes they never leave. At least one type of PFA, it might be longer than a decade. This longevity is what makes the PFAs more worrisome to many experts than many other harmful chemicals. Now, these chemicals come in and they spread out. Once they pass through our digestive system, they find their way into the liver, and from there, some get into the bloodstream. They bind to small proteins in our blood, which makes our blood an excellent delivery system to get to all sorts of places. and all kinds of organs. They ride along in our blood, reaching all over the body. So researchers believe this is part of the reason why such a wide variety of ailments are associated with PFAs. And once they're circulating around, they have the ability to infiltrate a number of organs and body systems. One of the best understood mechanisms for how they interrupt body function is because they impersonate another substance the body has grown to expect and welcome as being natural. On a molecular level, the PFAs, the PFOAs, resemble fatty acids. So this allows them to combine with certain receptors in the cellular nuclear receptors. Now, essentially, the molecule fools the cell to get into the door because the fatty acids, which the PFAs mimic, are essential to the body's normal functioning. They are playing an absolute key role in energy storage. They influence cell metabolism, and they influence how our body responds to hormones. So when these chemicals mimic fatty acids to get inside our cells and bond with nuclear receptors, then all kinds of problems start happening. By impersonating fatty acids, scientists believe PFAs, PFOAs have the potential to alter how our bodies store and use fat. So how do we evict them? Well, as opposed to other chemicals, which are processed and eliminated rather quickly and efficiently, so far, we don't know of a good way to remove them from our body. Very little of it leaves the body through the urine and the bile, but again, not much of it and not very quickly. Scientists have seen these polyfluorinated chemicals decrease when a parent passes them along to a child through the placenta or through nursing. Studies suggested donating blood can reduce your PFA levels. But then you're simply passing these substances onto another person or onto your child. Now, you might have thought that as a woman, menstruation was a bother. But hey, this could be a very important excretion mechanism for these chemicals, which is another reason why we should consider having a period after menopause. I am posting another link down at the bottom that takes you to a webpage on the National Cancer Institute webpage discussing the correlation of PFAS exposure with kidney cancer, testicular cancer, breast cancer, ovarian and endometrial cancer, prostate cancer, non-Hodgkin lymphoma, thyroid cancer, and childhood leukemia. So again, how do we eliminate them from our body? Number one, avoid exposure. A lot of them are in water. And the only techniques that have been found to treat PFAs from water are carbon absorption, ion exchange, and reverse osmosis. So be aware of where they are. They're in our cleaning products, water-resistant fabrics like rain jackets, umbrellas, and tents, on grease-resistant paper, in non-stick cookware, and sometimes in personal care products, shampoos, dental floss, nail polish, even in eye makeup. They might be present in stain-resistant coatings used on carpets, upholstery, and fabrics. Number two, we want to eliminate them by blood. So keep menstruating as a woman. Again, these chemicals are eliminated with the blood, with the urine, and the stool, but not our sweat. Keep drinking clean water to flush out these harmful chemicals as fast as possible. And apparently keep menstruating because having a period has the added benefit of possibly reducing our risk of cancer. I will end here and come back with one more episode in this series about living in a dirty world and making the best of it. And I might try to tackle food addiction and how we can make healthier food choices day in, day out, considering our crazy busy lives. Thank you for listening. Thank you so much for listening. If you are one of my faithful listeners and you are finding value and enjoying these episodes, please feel free to leave me a review on whatever platform you're listening to. Also, if you find the content in these topics useful, not just to you, but to someone else, a friend, a loved one, or simply an acquaintance that you know could benefit from the knowledge I share here, please feel free to forward my podcast to them. If you live in California and you'd like to work with our practice to help you achieve your wellness goals, please go to our website, www.herabeautyandwellness.com, and request an appointment. It will be our privilege to help you in any way, shape, and form we can. Any suggestions on a topic of beauty, wellness, or anti-aging are welcome. All you have to do is go to the website, leave a suggestion into the AI chat, and I promise you, if you ask, I will listen and add your suggestion to my list of topics that I want to get to as soon as possible. Please join our Facebook group, The Wellness Optimizing Warrior MD. It's a small growing community that focuses on wellness, on what's new, what's safe, and what works in beauty, wellness, and anti-aging.